$4. That was the highest bid anyone in Prospect Hollow, Wyoming had offered for the last cow Lynn Wren owned in the world, and the auctioneer's gavel was already rising to close the sale. She stood at the edge of the market crowd in her dark blue Chong Sam, the fabric faded from sun and washing, her hand resting flat against the animal's warm flank as if she could hold the bidding back by touch alone. The cow's name was Plum. Lynn had raised her from a calf on land that no longer belonged to anyone, not since the bank had taken the rest of it 8 months before. She was 27 years old, a widow twice over in the eyes of the town. First, when her husband Wen Zhao had died of fever the winter before last, and second, when the bank had declared her claim on their homestead void, because a widow's name on a deed meant nothing without a man's signature beside it in the county records of 1878. But the gavel did not fall. A voice cut through the marketplace noise before the auctioneer could finish his count, low and unhurried, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to be heard. $10. The crowd turned. A man had stepped forward from the shade of the feed store awning, and Lynn recognized him the way the whole town did, by reputation more than by face. His name was Dutch Calloway, and he ran cattle on the largest spread within 30 miles, land his father had claimed before the war, and that Dutch had doubled since. He was not a young man anymore, past 40, with a weathered face and hands scarred from 20 years of rope burn and barbed wire. He did not look at Lynn. He looked at Plum, running his eyes over the cow's ribs and hooves the way a man appraises livestock. And the auctioneer, sensing a bidding war that would never come, called the sale before anyone else could speak. "Sold, $10 to Mr. Calloway." Lynn's hand did not leave the cow's side. She had known this moment was coming for 3 days, ever since the last of her flour ran out, and she had counted the coins in her tin box and found nothing there that would carry her through winter. But knowing a thing was coming did not make the losing of it easier, and she felt the crowd's eyes on her, the particular attention a town pays to a woman who has run out of options in public. Dutch Calloway paid the auctioneer in silver and led Plum away by a length of rope he'd produced from his coat pocket, and Lynn turned before she had to watch the cow disappear down Main Street, because there was a version of dignity that survived losing everything, and it depended on not watching. She walked back toward the boarding house room she rented above the seamstress shop. $3 a month, 4 weeks left before that ran out too, and she did not look at the faces of the townspeople she passed. Mrs. Abernathy, who ran the general store, had stopped extending credit to her in the spring. The Finley brothers, who worked the livery, had stopped nodding to her on the street sometime after her husband's funeral, when it became clear a Chinese widow with no male relative to vouch for her was a complication nobody in Prospect Hollow wanted to carry. She had come to America at 19, married to a man 11 years her senior who had crossed the ocean 2 years before her to work the railroad grade outside Cheyenne. Wen Zhao had saved enough to buy 40 acres and build a house with his own hands, and for 4 years they had built something together that felt, in the good months, like it might last. Then the fever took him in a single terrible week, and the county clerk had informed her, not unkindly but not gently either, that a widow's claim required a cosigner, and since Wen Zhao's brother in California would not respond to letters, the land reverted. She had sold the furniture first, then the tools, then the chickens, and this morning she had sold the cow, and she did not yet know what she would sell next, because there was almost nothing left to sell. The knock came at her door 2 hours later, while she was mending a torn hem by the window light to earn what pennies she could from the seamstress downstairs. She opened it expecting Mrs. Danvers with a message about rent, but it was Dutch Calloway standing in the narrow hallway, hat in his hands, and behind him, tethered to the porch rail below, stood Plum. "Ma'am," he said, "I believe I bought this cow under false pretenses." Lynn did not understand. Her English was fluent but careful, learned from 4 years of necessity, and she searched his face for the trick she assumed was there. "The sale was fair. You paid $10. She is a good cow." "She's a fine cow." Dutch turned his hat once in his hands, a habit she would come to recognize later as the closest he came to nervousness. "But I didn't buy her because I needed another head of cattle, ma'am. I've got 460 of them already grazing my land, and one more milk cow wasn't going to change my situation any. I bought her because I've watched this town treat you like you don't exist for the better part of a year, and I got tired of watching it." She said nothing. Down on the street, a woman with a market basket had slowed her walk, and a man loading lumber onto a wagon had stopped to listen without pretending not to. "I'm bringing her back," Dutch said. "Free and clear, no debt owed. But I came with something else to ask you, and I'd rather ask it plain than dress it up in something prettier than it is." Lynn's grip tightened on the door frame. "What is it you want, Mr. Calloway?" "I want you to marry me." The words landed in the hallway like a dropped plate, and for a moment neither of them moved. Down on the street, the woman with the market basket had stopped walking entirely. "I'm not a young man," Dutch continued, before she could answer, before she could even form the shape of a reply. "I'm 43 years old, and I've buried a wife already, 10 years back. No children came of it. I run 460 head of cattle, and I need someone who can keep the books, because I never learned my letters past what the Army taught me, and every foreman I hire skims more than he ought. But I'm not asking you because I need a bookkeeper. I'm asking because I've watched you hold your ground in this town for a year with nothing behind you but your own 2 hands, and I think that's worth more than land." "You do not know me," Lynn said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "You know that I lost a husband and a home. That is not knowing a person." "No," Dutch agreed, "it isn't. That's why I'm not asking you to say yes today. I'm asking you to think on it. The cow's yours regardless. Nothing about my offer changes what happens to her." He set his hat back on his head, and for a moment Lynn thought that was the end of it. A strange proposal delivered and then withdrawn into the ordinary business of the afternoon. But before he turned to leave, he added one more thing, quiet enough that only she could hear it over the street noise below. "My wife's name was Anna. She used to say a marriage built on convenience still has room in it for something real, if both people are willing to build it. I've thought about that a long while since she passed. I'd like the chance to find out if she was right." Then he was gone, down the stairs and out onto Main Street, and Lynn stood in her doorway with Plum lowing softly on the tether below, and the whole of Prospect Hollow watching to see what she would do next. The town did not wait long to have its opinion. By supper that evening, the story had traveled from the market to the saloon to the church social committee, growing new details with each telling, and by the time Lynn walked to the well behind the boarding house the following morning, 3 women were already waiting there with their buckets and their questions disguised as neighborly concern. "Is it true Dutch Calloway proposed marriage to you in the hallway of the boarding house?" asked Mrs. Ida Purdy, whose husband owned the hardware store, and whose tone suggested she already believed the answer and simply wanted to hear it confirmed. "He returned my cow," Lynn said, drawing water and refusing to meet 3 sets of eyes at once. "What he said afterward is his business and mine." "A cattleman like Dutch Calloway doesn't propose in hallways," said the second woman, Mrs. Ruth Talmadge, whose husband ran the bank that had taken Lynn's homestead the year before, and whose interest in the matter felt sharper than idle gossip. "He's had 3 widows in this territory set their cap for him since Anna passed, and he's turned every one away polite as Sunday. Something about this doesn't sit right." Lynn lifted her bucket and did not answer, and she carried the water back to her room with her jaw set and her mind turning over the accusation buried in Ruth Talmadge's words. It did not sit right to them, a cattleman with 460 head proposing to a Chinese widow with nothing to her name but a cow and $3 worth of belongings. But sitting right had never been a standard applied evenly in Prospect Hollow, and Lynn had learned that lesson at considerable cost. She saw Dutch again 2 days later, not by his doing, but because the town forced the matter. The occasion was a dispute at the feed store, where Otis Finley, the younger of the 2 livery brothers, had accused Lynn of taking more than her fair measure of grain on credit she did not have, loud enough that half the street heard it. "I paid in full," Lynn said, standing her ground in the doorway while Otis blocked her path with his shoulder against the frame. "The receipt is in my hand." "Receipts can be forged," Otis said. "Wouldn't be the first time someone's tried to cheat honest folk out of what they're owed." It was a small cruelty, the kind Lynn had absorbed 100 times in the past year without anyone stepping between her and the accusation. But this time Dutch Calloway was crossing the street with a coil of fencing wire over his shoulder, and he stopped when he saw the scene unfolding outside the feed store. "Otis," Dutch said, and something in his voice made the younger man's shoulder drop an inch from the door frame. "You accusing this woman of theft in front of witnesses?" "I'm asking questions any reasonable man would ask, Mr. Calloway. You're blocking a paying customer's path out of a store she settled honest, and you're doing it because you think nobody in this town will stand up and call it what it is." Dutch set the wire down against the storefront wall. "I was there when she paid Sam Hartley for that grain 3 days back. Watched the whole transaction. You want to keep calling her a liar? You can say it to me directly instead of to her back." Otis's face went through several colors before he stepped aside, muttering something about not meaning offense, and Lynn walked past him with her chin level and her grain sack held tight against her hip. But she stopped a few feet down the boardwalk and turned back. "You did not need to do that," she said. "No," Dutch agreed, "but somebody needed to, and I was standing close enough. The town is saying things about your offer, that it is strange, that something is wrong with it." Dutch picked the wire back up, settling it across his shoulder with the ease of a man who had carried heavier loads for longer distances. "Town said a lot of things about me over the years, ma'am. Most of it's been wrong before. I expect this'll be no different. They ask why you would choose someone like me, when you could have any widow from 3 counties over. I've had offers from those widows," Dutch said, plain as fact and not as boast. "Turned every one down before I ever laid eyes on you at that auction. Wasn't looking for a wife at all, until I watched you stand at that market with your hand on that cow's flank, refusing to look away even when the whole town was watching you lose the last thing you owned. That's not a small thing, holding your ground like that. I've seen grown men crumble under less." She had no answer for that, not one that came easily, and she walked the rest of the way to the boarding house with his words turning over in her mind like a stone worn smooth by water. The following week brought the first real trouble, and it arrived in the shape of Ruth Talmadge's husband, Cornelius Talmadge, who ran the Prospect Hollow Trust and Savings, the same bank that had claimed Lynn's homestead the year before under the letter of territorial law. He came to the boarding house on a Thursday afternoon, immaculately dressed, even in the August heat, and he did not bother with the pleasantries Lynn had come to expect from men who wanted something from her. "Mrs. Wren," he said, standing in the boarding house parlor with his hat under his arm, "I understand there's been talk of a marriage arrangement between yourself and Dutch Calloway." "There is talk of many things in this town, Mr. Talmadge. I am not certain which of them concerns your bank." "All of it concerns my bank, when the man in question holds a mortgage with us on 460 head of cattle and 11,000 acres of grazing land." Cornelius smiled thinly. "Dutch Calloway is a valued customer. I'd hate to see his judgment compromised by a hasty personal decision." Lynn understood then what the visit was truly about, and something cold settled into her chest, the particular chill of watching a threat arrive dressed as concern. "You believe I am after his money?" "I believe a woman in your circumstances, having lost everything to the letter of the law once already, might see a wealthy husband as a solution to a great many problems. I don't say that to insult you. I say it because it's a reasonable thing for a banker to consider." "And if I refuse his offer, does your bank's concern for Mr. Calloway's judgment disappear?" Cornelius's smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes sharpened. "I understand you're several weeks behind on your room rent here, Mrs. Wren, and I understand the seamstress downstairs has been carrying you on credit for the mending work you do. It would be a shame if word got around that a woman of uncertain character was taking advantage of the goodwill of honest tradespeople in this town. Word travels fast in a place this size." He left without waiting for a response, and Lynn stood alone in the parlor with her hands folded tight against her stomach, understanding for the first time the full shape of what she was facing. It was not merely gossip any more. Cornelius Talmadge held influence over every merchant and landlord in Prospect Hollow through the debts they owed his bank, and a word from him could close every door in town that had not already closed itself. She did not tell Dutch what had happened, not at first, because telling him felt like asking him to fight a battle on her behalf that she had not yet decided to enter. But 3 days later, when the seamstress downstairs told her, gently but firmly, that she could no longer extend credit for mending work, Lynn understood that the decision was being made for her whether she liked it or not. She found Dutch at the edge of town, mending a section of fence along the road that led out toward his ranch, his sleeves rolled to the elbow and sweat darkening the back of his shirt in the summer heat. He straightened when he saw her walking toward him, setting down his pliers against a fence post. "Cornelius Talmadge came to see me," she said, without preamble, because there was no gentle way to say what needed saying. "He believes I intend to marry you for your money. He has made it clear that if I refuse you, or if I accept you for the wrong reasons, my situation in this town will not improve. He has already begun closing doors." Dutch's jaw tightened, and for a moment Lynn saw something dangerous move behind his eyes, quickly controlled. "Cornelius Talmadge holds paper on half the ranches in this territory, including mine. He's used that leverage to bully smaller men out of their land for a decade, and he's never once had the nerve to say it to my face." "He is not wrong to wonder," Lynn said quietly. "I have lost everything twice in this territory. A wealthy husband would solve a great many problems for me." "Would it?" Dutch said, not quite a question. "Solve the problem of a man twice your age? Solve the problem of a ranch that needs a partner who can read ledgers I can't make sense of, in a house that's had nobody living in it but me and my foreman for 10 years. Solve the problem of a town that'll never fully accept either one of us, married or not, given how they've treated you already. You make it sound difficult. It would be difficult, Dutch said. I'm not going to stand here and tell you otherwise. But difficult isn't the same as wrong, and I'd rather you decide on the truth of it than on whatever fear Cornelius Talmadge is trying to plant in your head. He picked his pliers back up, returning to the fence wire, but he did not look away from her while he spoke his next words. I'm not asking for an answer today, but I'll tell you this much plain. If you say no to me because you believe it, that's your right, and I'll respect it. If you say no to me because Cornelius Talmadge scared you into it, that's a different matter, and I won't stand for a man like that deciding your future for you when he's already taken enough from this territory's widows. That night, Lynn sat by her window with the lamp burned low, mending work spread across her lap that she had less and less reason to finish, and she found herself thinking not of Cornelius Talmadge's threats, but of a small wooden box she kept beneath her bed, the one possession from her marriage to Wen Zhao that she had never been able to sell. Inside it were 4 letters, the ones he had written her during the 2 years he worked the railroad grade before she crossed the ocean to join him, each one carefully folded and softened from years of handling. She had read them so many times the ink had begun to fade at the creases, and that night she read them again, searching for something she could not quite name. Wen Zhao had written to her about the land he was saving to buy, about the house he intended to build with his own hands, about a future neither of them could yet see, but both of them believed in with the particular faith of the young. He had never once written about love in the way novels described it, all sweeping declaration and instant devotion. He had written about partnership, about building something together, about the quiet accumulation of trust over years rather than the sudden lightning strike of romance. She thought of Dutch Calloway's dead wife, Anna, and the words he had quoted from her. A marriage built on convenience still has room in it for something real, if both people are willing to build it. It was not so different from what Wen Zhao had believed, in his own quieter way, and Lynn found herself wondering if perhaps she had been searching for the wrong kind of proof these past few days, looking for a grand romantic gesture when what actually mattered was something far more practical and far more durable. She did not sleep well that night, and in the morning she walked to the general store to buy what little she could still afford, and it was there that the second crisis arrived, faster and more dangerous than she expected. A fire had broken out at the grain warehouse behind the feed store some time before dawn, and by the time Lynn reached Main Street, half the town was gathered watching flame and smoke pour from the building's roof while men formed a bucket line from the well. The warehouse held the season's harvested grain, the difference between a hard winter and a survivable one for a dozen families in the territory, and the fire was spreading faster than the bucket line could contain it. Dutch Calloway was already there, coat off, sleeves rolled, directing men to clear a fire break along the warehouse's northern wall before the flames could reach the adjoining stable where a dozen horses stood trapped and screaming behind a door someone had forgotten to open. Lynn did not think. She ran toward the stable through smoke thick enough to sting her eyes, and she reached the door before anyone could stop her, throwing the bolt back and pulling it open against the heat radiating from the wall beside it. The horses bolted past her in a panic of hooves and noise, and she pressed herself flat against the door frame to keep from being trampled, coughing against the smoke that had filled her lungs. "Lynn!" Dutch's voice cut through the chaos, and then his hands were on her shoulders, pulling her back from the stable as the roof above it groaned with the sound of collapsing timber. They cleared the building together just as the structure gave way behind them, a wall of heat and sparks rushing out into the street. "You could have died," Dutch said, gripping her shoulders, his face inches from hers, soot-streaked and furious with fear rather than anger. 12 horses aren't worth your life." "They were going to burn," Lynn said, her voice raw from smoke. "I could not stand there and watch." The fire burned another hour before the bucket line and a shift in the wind finally brought it under control, and by the time the last embers were smothered, half the warehouse's grain store was lost, but the stable and every horse in it had survived. The town gathered in the street afterward, exhausted and soot-covered, and it was Otis Finley of all people who spoke first into the quiet. "She went into that stable when the rest of us were too scared to try it," he said, looking at Lynn with an expression she had not seen from him before. "Whatever this town's been saying about her, I saw what I saw." Cornelius Talmadge stood at the edge of the crowd, his fine coat streaked with ash from having joined the bucket line himself, and for the first time since Lynn had known him, he said nothing at all. 3 days after the fire, Cornelius Talmadge returned to the boarding house, and this time his manner had changed entirely. He stood in the parlor turning his hat in his hands, an unconscious echo of the gesture Dutch had made weeks before, and Lynn watched him search for words that did not come easily. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Wren," he said finally. "I came to you believing you were after Dutch Calloway's money, and I threatened your livelihood in this town to protect what I believed was his interest. What you did at that fire was not the act of a woman looking for an easy arrangement. It was the act of someone with more courage than most men in this territory, myself included." "You said you would close every door in town to me," Lynn said, not softening the accusation. "The seamstress stopped extending credit because of your words." "I spoke to her yesterday. The credit's been restored, and I've settled your outstanding rent at the boarding house myself, as an apology I should have offered without needing a fire to teach me the lesson." Cornelius set his hat back on his head. "Dutch Calloway has been a customer of my bank for 15 years, and I let my concern for his ledger cloud my judgment about what actually matters. That won't happen again." He left, and Lynn stood alone in the parlor for a long while afterward, turning over the strange reversal of the past week, the way a single act of courage had accomplished what a year of quiet endurance had not. She found Dutch that evening at the edge of his property, sitting on the porch of a ranch house she had never seen up close before, a solid clapboard building with a wide covered porch and a view of grazing land stretching toward the mountains in the distance. He stood when he saw her walking up the drive, and something in his face told her he had been waiting, though not certain for what. "I've been thinking about your offer," Lynn said, standing at the bottom of the porch steps. "Not because of the fire, and not because Cornelius Talmadge changed his opinion of me. I want you to understand that clearly before I say anything else." "I understand," Dutch said. "My husband, Wen Zhao, never spoke to me of love the way the stories describe it. He spoke of building something together, slowly, over years, with trust as the foundation rather than feeling. I have thought about that a great deal these past weeks, and about what your wife Anna believed, that a practical arrangement can still hold something real inside it, if two people are willing to build toward it honestly." "And what have you decided?" "I have decided that I do not know if what grows between us will become what the stories call love. But I know that you returned a cow you had no obligation to return, and you stood between me and a man's cruelty in front of the whole town without being asked, and you did not flinch when I told you the truth about Cornelius Talmadge's threats. Those are not small things. I have built a life once before on smaller foundations than that." Dutch came down the porch steps until he stood close enough that she could see the careful hope in his face. A man who had clearly expected disappointment and was working to keep from expecting anything else instead. "Is that a yes, Lynn Wren?" "It is a yes," she said. "But I will keep your books, and I will have my say in how this ranch is run. And I will not become an ornament in your house while you make every decision alone. If we build this together, it will be together in truth, not merely in name." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Dutch said. And for the first time since she had known him, he smiled without reservation, and Lynn found herself smiling back before she had decided to. They married in October in the small chapel at the edge of town, with a gathering far larger than either of them expected. Otis Findlay stood near the back with his brother, having become, in the months since the fire, something like an ally to Lynn rather than an accuser. Mrs. Purdy and Mrs. Talmadge sat together in a middle pew, their earlier suspicions folded away into the polite silence of women who had been proven wrong and knew better than to say so aloud. Cornelius Talmadge himself stood near the front, having insisted on providing the wedding supper as a final gesture of amends. Lynn wore the same dark blue cheongsam she had worn the day of the auction, mended and pressed for the occasion, because she saw no reason to hide the woman she had been in order to become the woman she was becoming. Dutch wore his father's old wedding suit, kept in a cedar chest for 20 years, and when he took her hand at the altar, his grip was steady in a way that told her everything his words had not yet said. 6 months passed before the true measure of their partnership became visible to the town, the way such things always take time to prove themselves in a place built on hard winters and harder judgment. By the following spring, the Callaway ranch ledgers were the tightest in the territory, kept in a careful hand that caught every discrepancy the foreman had been skimming for years, and the herd had grown by 60 head through breeding decisions Lynn had studied and argued for against the advice of men twice her age in ranching experience. Plum still grazed in the near pasture behind the house, retired from milking duty and treated, by unspoken agreement between husband and wife, as something closer to a family monument than livestock. Lynn often found herself standing at the fence in the evenings, her hand resting against the same warm flank she had touched the day of the auction, and she thought sometimes of how close she had come to losing everything twice over, and how strange it was that the losing of a single cow had turned out to be the beginning of everything she had built since. Cornelius Talmadge's bank extended the Callaway Ranch a line of credit for expansion that spring, the first such offer he had made in years, and he told Dutch privately, over coffee in his office, that it was the soundest investment his bank had made in a decade, given the woman keeping the books. The town of Prospect Hollow, which had once watched Lynn Wren lose her last cow at auction with the particular cruelty of collective indifference, now watched her ride into town on market days at her husband's side, greeted by name at the general store, trusted at the bank, respected by the very men who had once blocked her path in a feed store doorway. It was not a transformation that happened all at once, and it was not one that erased everything that had come before it, but it was real, built slowly and honestly over months of proven partnership, the way Wen Zhao had once told her all lasting things were built, and the way Anna Callaway had believed a practical arrangement could still hold something true inside it. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.